You say Mugato, I say Mugato. You say Gumato, I say Mugato. Gumato, Gumato, Mugato, Mugato. I try my best for you folks. I try my best. Hello interwebs and welcome to my review of the 4th episode of Star Trek Lower Decks Season 2 Mugato Gumato? Something along those lines. I am gonna mispronounce this name so many times, but it's okay because Star Trek does it and it's actually a joke in this episode, so we're all good. I think it's only appropriate that I screw up the name of these aliens. But yes, today, as per usual, I'm gonna be doing my spoiler-free section review of this episode, and then we'll get into full spoilers after that. So, spoiler-free, what did I think of this episode? Well, I have to say up front, I think this might be the weakest episode so far this season, but it's by no means bad. I don't think there's been a bad episode of Lower Decks yet. I've enjoyed them all, yet this one kind of feels like I can feel the seams a little bit more on this one. The sort of main conflict that this episode kind of focuses on for a large part of it is kind of forced. It's sort of forced conflict and sort of forced worry between Rutherford and Boimler against Mariner. Again, I won't get into it too much here, but it's sort of like a kind of one of those like misunderstandings, misinformation bits that kind of always frustrate me when I see them crop up in TV shows and things like this, where it's like if characters just talked for all of 2 seconds, the issue would have been alleviated, but the whole plot is sort of referencing on this fact that the characters that normally would just talk to each other don't. And so that kind of felt a little bit frustrating, a little bit forced here. That being said, though, I do like the setup of this episode with the Cerritos being brought to this planet to sort of dealing with the Mugatos, which are the alien sort of like monkey people that we saw in, I believe, the original series episode, A Private Little War, which was cool to see them get brought back, and also another alien that is sort of behind all of this in a really cool twist that I really enjoyed and had a lot of fun with. And also it was nice to see some time for Rutherford and Boimler. Last episode we got Mariner and Tendi, now we're getting Rutherford and Boimler, so now we're sort of pairing those off, which I'm really liking this mixing up of these characters. I do hope that we sort of mix up gender pairings as well too, like Boimler getting to hang out with Tendi and Mariner getting to hang out with Rutherford as well, because I kind of see like probably there was some like impetus like, oh, girls go together, boys go together, so I hope they switch that up a little bit. But overall, I'm liking that we're sort of getting some diversity of pairings and characters sort of being set up in ways that we normally don't get to see, so all of that was really fun. Also, I should say on top of that, on top of all of this, even despite my negatives, the animation in this episode was top notch. All the animation in Lower Decks is usually really great, but particularly this episode, the animation they do for the planets and for the aliens was spectacular. I saw it multiple times throughout this episode. I was like, this looks freaking gorgeous. So just a really good job on all of those fronts. And then there was also 2 other storylines going on here, one with Tendi and then one with Captain Freeman. Both fun, both kind of playing on their own tropes as well, but a lot shorter than the sort of main plot going on with Boimler, Rutherford, and Mariner. So I think, kind of staying in my spoiler-free mode, one sort of like meta-narrative I could kind of place on this, and I won't harp on it too much because I brought it up in previous episodes, and I understand the impetus for the show to do this. This episode feels like it really could have also been placed into season 1. It wouldn't have changed anything. And I don't want to harp on this too much, but it just sort of, again, I just wish that this show hadn't fallen back into the status quo so quickly. Maybe that's just me. Maybe that's just my own thought. Maybe I need to get over it. It is very possible. If it's something that all of you are like, Jessie, shut up about it, then that's totally fine with me. It's not a bad thing per se. It's just something that was like, oh yeah, I can kind of notice that the show has kind of gotten back into where it was in season 1 in terms of the dynamics and stakes and setup, with all the characters in their place, including characters like Shax, for example, being where he was. So all that being said, this episode is a solid one. I enjoyed it. I thought there's some really good stuff in here, some really good jokes, some really good references to Star Trek of the past. But ultimately, this is one where I kind of felt the seams a little bit more than I normally do. And I felt like it was one of the weaker entries of this season and the series overall. But again, not a bad episode in and of itself. All that being said, it is time to get into spoilers, so let's break it down. Break it down. I'm not gonna, that's not for Jessie to do. No, I'm not that cool. Now that I've appropriately shaved myself, let's get into spoilers. We start off with a great cold open with Boimler and Rutherford going in to do some jujitsu wearing the old uniforms from, I believe, Next Generation. I forget exactly where those uniforms are from, the sort of like weird jujitsu uniforms. But they've been practicing at night, and so they asked Mariner to play with them, and they're like, yes, we're finally gonna beat her because she can kick our butts. And then Mariner just like, oh, now I can really takes the gloves off and really just beats the crap out of them. It was a lot of fun, and then just yelling, put the kids' gloves back on, put the kid gloves back on. And Shax comes in because he was scheduled, and he's like, oh, you two 2, just have fun. Great little opening sequence. Yeah, what I like about this opening sequence, and what I've been noticing throughout this entire season, what they've been using the opening sequences for, is they're kind of like a microcosm of the conflict or the sort of main arc of the episode. Because this episode's showing that both Boimler and Rutherford sort of feel like they're playing second fiddle to Mariner, that they aren't as good as her, and that Mariner has these extra skills as well. So I've seen that multiple times in these opening sequences, that they've been sort of like microcosms, sort of setting up the arcs, even though they're sort of their own scenes in of themselves, sort of separated from the episode. So credit to the writers, they sort of set up that dynamic, set up where we're at the beginning with these sort of opening sketches, and then continuing on with doing something further with it later on. So it's a good, nice little setup. And that's something that I think continues into the next scene here, where we see Rutherford and Boimler playing was it Compromise? I forget the name of the game, but like sort of a negotiation game together, like a very nerdy game, very Star Trekians. Like the whole point of the game is to compromise and to both lose and feel bad. Feels very Star Trek. I loved that, because that eventually comes back around at the end of the episode. Again, this is something that I've noticed Lower Decks is just really, really great at doing, is like setup and payoff, those like Chekhov's guns in character-focused ways. But then we sort of get this idea of the boys go up to the bar, and the bartender starts saying like, well, have you heard of Mariner? She might be a Black Ops agent. And you get the like dramatic lighting. It's all very fun. And this sort of sets up the main plot of the episode, that Rutherford and Boimler start to believe like, oh, maybe Mariner is a Black Ops agent. Maybe she's like the Maquis, Tuvek on the Maquis, or Section 31, or Starfleet Intelligence, and all that. She's like a secret agent on here. And so they start to research her backstory and find out that she's on an old ship, the Atlantis, which is a great name for a starship, by the way, that she was on a ship where everyone had disappeared. And then they start like, they get suspicious of her as the episode goes on. Here's, again, this is what I was talking about in my spoiler-free section. This is like a setup that, like, if they just talk to Mariner about it for a hot second, it's like, hey, are you a Black Ops agent? Which I feel like they would do. Like, Mariner would just say what she says later on in the episode, which is, oh yeah, no, I made up that story just for kicks. Now, there's a possibility, as we'll talk later on, that there might be set up for Mariner actually being a Black Ops agent. Maybe that's a twist that'll come later this season. And that'll be a nice little, like a long-running Chekhov's gun that they're setting up here. But as it stands, it's just kind of frustrating, because it's just kind of like, I hate plots sort of built on misinformation where characters could just talk to each other and resolve the problem. And it feels even more frustrating because the episode also sets up this other arc throughout it that kind of gets touched upon as well, of like Boimler and Rutherford not feeling good enough compared to Mariner. Like, they're not tough as she is. And the resolution of this whole sequence, just as we'll get to, I'll sort of skip ahead a little bit, is that Rutherford and Boimler are able to solve the problem with their brains. They don't necessarily beat things up like Mariner does, but they're able to negotiate with the Ferengi that we learn are the people sort of bringing stuff. We'll get to that. There's that natural setup there. The emotional arc really felt like it was between Mariner being better than Boimler and Rutherford, because they aren't necessarily the tough ones, but they're the smart ones, and them being able to use their brains instead of the brawn in order to figure things out. And also dovetailing with stuff that we saw earlier with Mariner, and I think back in episode 2 of the season, with her not really being a forward-thinking character. She never really thinks things out, instead of her like learning how important that is. I think that was a really good arc to hand this on, but instead the episode kind of takes this sidestep into like, oh, it's about this Black Ops agent misinformation with Mariner that could have just been resolved with the discussion. And it's like, oh, you had such an interesting character arc already there that you touch upon, but you sort of take the sidestep that I feel is a bit more frustrating character arc wise. All that being said, that's sort of my big critique of this arc in this episode. But going into it, the Cerritos gets sent to a planet because we have the Mugato, the sort of aliens that we saw from the original series on this planet. They're not supposed to be there. It's sort of an animal control situation. A lot of fun with that. We go down to the planet. Shax leads the away team. Again, this leads me to another question, and something I was referencing before, like this status quo thing. It's like, because now Shax is clearly the security officer again, but what happened to Kayshawn, who we see a couple times in this episode doing security type things as well? And so it's like, is he still the security chief? Are they handing it off? I have a little bit of questions there, and it just feels like the show's like settled back into a status quo without really like addressing some of the things that I feel like would have repercussions going forward. Now, I know things are going to be brought back, like Boimler's double, and I'm sure Kayshawn will come up in future episodes, and we still have Jet hanging around, so there's still elements that will be played off, but this episode just doesn't feel like it's addressing any of those things. Not that it needs to, it could just be a fun one-off episode, but it's just sort of like weird that we're sort of back in this status quo space. I'll let it go, though, but just something I just want to notice because Shax is leading the away team here. We go on the planet, we find out the Ferengi are stealing the Mugatos, bringing them to this planet and sort of like selling them and killing them, selling their horns and stuff for sport. Again, a very Ferengi thing to do, as Mariner references later on in the episode, very last outpost evil Ferengi, as opposed to like Quark Ferengi, who is much deeper in more gray instead of just straight up evil capitalists. So I like that sort of distinction of the different types of Ferengi here, and using the term the last outpost being referenced here. Maybe that breaks canon a little bit stuff. I heard an interview with Mike McMahon how they do think they stretch the boundaries of canon a little bit when they actually reference episode titles within the show, but they say like maybe it's like people name their logs, like if they read the Enterprise Picard logs, that it's actually them in universe like naming the logs the name of the episode. So I guess it works, but I get what they're going for, and it made sense, and I like the reference of the different types of Ferengi there. But then this sets off the Ferengi start attacking them. Mariner sort of like seems to attack Shax. Again, I kind of, as I saw that, I was sort of like, oh, it's going to be clearly it's just they misunderstood something, like she's just sucking out the venom of something like that. I kind of saw it coming. I was never really duped into it, and so again, it's just like I kind of see the setup, and I really would have much preferred the better character setup of like, oh, they feel like they couldn't help compared to Mariner being able to help in this situation. But that's not the way they go. They go with them being like afraid of her being a Black Ops agent, which frustrating. But then Rutherford and Boimler have a couple fun little interactions. They meet Patingi, a biologist. I thought that was a fun little moment, but it kind of dealt with really too quickly. Probably as a reference to something. I don't remember this biologist in Star Trek references in history. It might be a reference to something, but it's not coming to my mind immediately. And then we also had the weird bit with the Mugatos like having sex and there being one that wants to watch and not assert dominance, which that was funny. A little bit weird. I'm sure will not be to everyone's taste. I don't mind that kind of humor. I laughed at it. It was just strange and weird enough for me to enjoy the weird sexual joke there. For me, it worked. Others, I'm sure, will be grossed out by it. However, one additional thing that I really loved at the end of this episode was the brief little scene where we saw T'Ana taking care of Shax, and T'Ana being like, oh yeah, I'm gonna heal you so good. Sort of implying like a little sexual innuendo, absolutely hysterical, but also building off of the relationship that we saw these two kind of earning in the background of season 1. So I just really like that continuing thread here. I thought that was really, really funny. And I'm also just so here for their relationship. But then this brings them back to the Mariner. Mariner gets caught in a leg trap, which I thought was cool. I liked that it was like a force field trap, like a weird, like ethical foot trap to capture Mugatos. Kind of an interesting idea there. And Mariner gets captured, but I like the sequence between here because it kind of gets in this Black Ops stuff. We sort of get that alleviated again. It's just like a simple conversation fixes the whole problem. And Mariner kind of quickly forgives them for them looking into her backstory and stuff like that against her wishes. But it's also sort of subtly building out this like history for Mariner. I kind of noticed too. We've gotten reference last episode of her history on Deep Space Nine. Now we get a history on Atlantis. So the writers are subtly seeding things of Mariner's backstory here, which I'm sure will get set up at some point and be brought to the fore in some way down the line. So I'm kind of noticing those seeds. I liked better, again, this arc of like when Boimler and Rutherford sort of say like, oh, the part that really affected us is like we didn't think you, someone so cool, would want to be friends with us. That resonated. That worked, but it didn't really come through as well in the rest of the episode, again, because of this Black Ops stuff. But then the end of the episode, Rutherford and Boimler are able to solve the situation because they are able to use their brains and negotiating skills and create a compromise with the Ferengi and actually create like ethical capitalism, like a free-range park for the Mugatos instead of like killing them off, and create ethical Ferengi by sort of using business to their advantage. Thought that was great, a wonderful little ending there, and Mariner's sort of like, oh, look at these boys, they're solving this with their brains. I thought that was really good, and again, I think it would have been more powerful if they had leaned into that storyline. But again, maybe they're seeding stuff down the line, like maybe Mariner is a Black Ops agent, so maybe that it's sort of like trying to serve two masters sort of stuff with the writers here. But overall, decent storyline, love the animation here. To quick talk about the other two storylines in this episode, we have a Tendi storyline where Tendi is assigned by Dr. T'Ana to go and get medical scans from people who haven't come in for their physicals. This obviously being a reference to Kirk in the original series, and I think a few other officers here and there who never wanted to do their physicals throughout the series. Like McCoy always had to hunt Kirk down. There was a few times that was referenced, despite the fact that like medical surveys are just, they scan you. It's not a big deal. It's like, why is that even a problem? So this was a funny little bit with Tendi sort of going around sort of scanning people for T'Ana, and Tendi learning to be more assertive, which is cool. I like that sort of character arc for her. Like last episode we talked about her as like not really taking center stage and not speaking up for herself. So I like this whole sequence of storylines that we're starting to get with Tendi of becoming more confident and being able to speak up for herself and fight for herself. I like that arc for her character. It's really wonderful, and I like it coming out here to the point where she actually has to stand up to her boss, Dr. T'Ana, and chases her down through the Jeffries tubes, and T'Ana doing like all the typical cat things, like hiding underneath the shuttle and like jumping around. I thought that was great, and Tendi sort of getting her by actually breaking her arm and then scanning her, and T'Ana being like, oh, well played. great arc for Tendi. I thought a funny little bit, didn't stay too long, great little storyline, referenced original series stuff, and showed character growth, so great on that. Then we get another little quick storyline with Captain Freeman, sort of accidentally blowing up one of the guy's shuttles that was trying to escape the planet, and turns out that this guy is like sort of using this to blackmail her to get a shuttle and all of her stuff, her trinkets, which was funny. It's nice, again, sort of playing on this trope of like Starfleet blows up people's shuttles all the time, and never seems to recompense them. So this guy's, that seems like an actual thing that Starfleet would do, is like, here, take a shuttle, just do it, we'll write it off, it'll be whatever. But then obviously the guy just blackmailing her and duping her to try and get her stuff, and eventually getting it back in the end. This is sort of, it's a small little thing. It wasn't like, again, one of those like, didn't overstay its welcome. I didn't think it pushed the characters forward too much, but it was a fun little delve into that trope. It didn't really do much for me overall, but I thought it was a fun little beat to sort of have in the background to sort of fill out time and fill out space. And also shows like Captain Freeman's captain ability. It's something that's sort of like been a background stuff going on this entire season so far, with Captain Freeman sort of getting critiqued as a captain to possibly be promoted by the end of the season, probably. My guess would be maybe by the end of the season, Captain Freeman will be up for a promotion. Maybe she will, or maybe she won't get promoted and someone else will step in her place, like Ransom or something like that. So that's my guess where that's going. But overall, I like this episode. It's definitely not a bad one. There's definitely some enjoyable stuff here to like, but I think on the whole, this is probably on the weaker end of episodes of the show that I've seen so far. Again, not bad, not unenjoyable, but weaker. So that's my thoughts on this episode. I'd love to hear all your thoughts, though, down in the comments below. Did you like this episode a whole lot more than I did? Don't forget I have a Patreon that you can support me on. Don't forget to subscribe and like for more videos, more reviews of Lower Decks and my other videos that I have on this channel. But beyond all of that, I just thank that you were here, and I hope that you, as always, live long and prosper.